everybody. Thanks for coming to our State of Agriculture event. For those that do not know me, my name is Brad, President of your Marshall Area Chamber of Commerce. Quick housekeeping, these bathrooms over here are not open. So you need to use the restroom, go over to the ones by the roly-poly court. And also, we have some events in aware of as well. We actually have a business after hours next Wednesday at the Lyon County Museum. You'll see some things about the 150th at that event. Also, 1 month from now, we are having a chamber speaker event series featuring Rob Hiller. Rob Hiller is actually originally from the Marshall area, so be looking for that. That invite will be coming out very soon. And then we're actually, since we moved into our new office, we haven't had a open house. August 31st, we're going to have a during hours event at the chamber. Keep in mind that anybody from your business can attend these events. We have some sponsors to thank. Bremer Bank and Titan Machinery are our series sponsors, so thanks to Bremer Bank and Titan. There'll be event sponsors, and they're all right below. First Independent Bank, Northwestern Farm Management, AU Environmental, Legal Estate Planning Solutions, Lockwood Motors, Egg Country Farm Credit Services, Landers Brothers Construction, Hennon Seeds, Egg Plus, Panka Insurance Agency, New York Life, MVTV Wireless, Animal Health Center, North Star Mutual Insurance, Olson Organics, Ace Home and Hardware, EDM, Relco, and Kibble Equipment. Please help me thank you, all these sponsors for today's event. I want to give a special shout out to one of our guests today, and that would be Shonda Walker. She is the facilitator for the Lyon and Murray County CEO programs. She's waving in the back. She works with high schoolers on entrepreneurship. A few of us met with her looking for some agriculture businesses for speaking opportunities, tours, and business visits. So if there's any agriculture businesses here, are there any? Maybe a few. Make sure you talk to Shonda before you leave. So this is our 5th year holding this panel, and why is it important? Agriculture is truly the lifeblood of this community of Marshall. When agriculture does well, the economy does better. It's important for ag-related businesses and businesses in general to hear from panelists that come from different ag backgrounds like we have here today. Our facilitator this year is Ken Fransky. Ken joined Central Crop Consulting in July of 2015. Ken manages technical agronomic training for consultants, internal cross-department education in field diagnostic assistance, interactive product training with agriculture companies, and being a communication bridge with university and industry personnel. Thanks, Ken, for facilitating today's panel. Come on up.
All right. Well, thanks, Brad, the chamber, everybody for being here. I believe this is the 3rd year Central's been part of the 5-year anniversary here today for the State of the Ag update. And I think it only gets better. I'm going to tease out a few things for next year, talking to my luncheon partners a little bit too. I started with my own crazy idea, and then it got better over lunch. So thanks, Brian and Carolyn and Jonathan, for helping stimulate some thought. So, moderator or facilitator, which would you prefer me to be? Facilitator, because the people sitting out here are going to be just as engaged, hopefully, as the 5 panelists, myself included there. So I'm going to bring up the panelists, and I do want to be fair that I'm going to have some quiz questions as I go through this, okay? Because we all have to go home more knowledgeable than we came in, right? That's the goal of things like this. Learn something about part of our ag industry that we don't know as much about. So the first panelist is Mike Borboum. Mike's been on the panel before. Mike is the CEO of Borboum Ag Resources, a family farming operation here of Marshall that produces about 400,000 market pigs annually. Okay, that's a big number. Keep that one in mind. Mike also serves on the board of Wholestone Foods, a farm-owned pork packing plant in Fremont, Nebraska. Welcome, Mike. All right, our second panelist is Senator Gary Dames. I believe he's here. Perfect, he's coming up. Gary is a former Redwood County Commissioner and current state senator for District, so West Central, West Minnesota, depending on how you define the county he represents. He is the chairman of the Senate Commerce and Consumer Protection, Finance, and Policy Committee, and vice chairman of the Senate Agriculture and Rural Development, Finance, and Policy Committee. So vice president of the Senate Ag Committee. That's a pretty important one for us in ag and for those of us who like to eat. All right, welcome, Senator Dames. Glad to have you. Our third panelist is Carolyn Olson. Her husband Jonathan's here with her today. Carolyn grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis. She's got such a unique story in agriculture, in my opinion, and joined her husband Jonathan on the farm in 1988. Once there, she quickly learned the ropes, preferring spring and fall tillage as well as running the combine. You know, she's not just bringing out lunches, keeping the kids in line. She is actively engaged in the day-to-day hands-on operation. As an organic crop farmer from southwest Minnesota, Carolyn has served in many policy development and leadership roles, both at a local, state, and national level. Carolyn has a passion, and if you haven't met her, you will see this, for bringing together all types of farmers for a better future for all of agriculture. Carolyn also makes a delicious roll. Ask her for her recipe. So here was my brainstorm last night and early this morning. Brad, instead of a luncheon next year, we need like a mid-morning brunchin'. And maybe we can get Carolyn to share that recipe and we'll do some taste testing. Just a random thought. I mean, maybe we can vote on it before we're all done today. And the panelist is Brian Nakamis. Brian lives in Lind with his wife Mindy. They have 7 children, 2 grandchildren. Brian is the owner and president CEO of Relco here in Marshall and serves as chairman of the board of directors of the True Shrimp Company based out of Balleton, Minnesota. Brian grew up near Balleton, graduated from Tracy Area High School in 1995, and then went on to graduate from Southwest State University in 2000 with a degree in business administration. Get this, Brian began working at Relco in 1992. Graduated in 1995. Good thing there wasn't child labor laws, I guess, in Lyon County, Brian. If I did the math backwards, that was about your freshman year in high school. You started to work for the company you're now president, CEO of. That's pretty remarkable. In 1998, Brian began working in marketing and sales, where he had opportunities to create and manage marketing plans, sales promotions, and supported salespeople both domestically and internationally. In April of 2004, Brian became vice president and was charged to oversee research and development, marketing, and emerging market channels. Brian stepped in the role of president and CEO of Relco at the end of 2015. Today, he continues to strategically champion the mission, vision, and values of Relco to ensure the organization is properly aligned to achieve them and to meet the needs of today's food producers and consumers. We got a pretty powerful 4-person panel, don't we? Lots of experience, lots of knowledge, lots of diversity. So we had a list of questions sent out to, I think, everybody that RSVP'd, and we have a list of about 10, 12 questions that I kind of subcategorized together. But before I dive into some of the questions we have here, does anybody have a question in the audience right now? Burning question that they'd like the panelists to maybe address. Otherwise, I'll get them to maybe start on some of the easy ones and up to some of the more complex, complicated ones. You know, 'cause usually after lunch on the farm, it's nap time for 15 minutes, so we're going to try to keep you awake. All right, to get everybody thinking, here's the quiz question. Tying some things together. How many hogs, market weight pigs, does Borboum Ag Resources market annually? 400,000. Now, Mike will correct me when I do the math wrong. You know, when I was a little tight growing up, helping Dad on the farm with pigs, we used to sell a market weight hog for about 200 pounds. Now it's probably about 300, Mike. I don't know what carcass hanging weight is, but I know how to do math more simple in front of an audience. 400,000 pigs. If each pig produces 150 pounds of pork that we can consume as individuals, That's 60 million pounds of pork from one family operation here in Lyon County. And the surrounding counties, you know, Carolyn, the contract feeder for Borboum as well too, so there's some interconnection. 600,000 pounds of pork ready to eat meat once you cook it. If I take that delicious 2-inch thick pork chop and have a really big party with all my friends and people I don't know, you know, a pound of a 2-inch pork chop, 16-ounce pork chop, that would feed 600 million people with one big party here at the Lyon County Fairgrounds, just to put things in perspective. Or a pound of bacon, if you do breakfast right like me, you need 3, 4, maybe 6 strips of bacon. So a pound of bacon might feed, you know, 3 of my friends and myself for breakfast tomorrow morning. 6 million pounds of pork. Okay, maybe Senator Dames knows the answer to this. What is the population of Lyon County, Minnesota, roughly, from the 2020 census? 18,000. In the ballpark. 26,000 according to the Google machine. I'm not wrong. You might be right. They can on Google. I don't know. Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's on base. What's the population of Minnesota? Give or take 6 million. Yep, 5.5, 6, 6.5, somewhere there. What's the population of the United States of America? About 330, 350 million. So if we took the 600 million pounds of pork going through Mike's company and all the affiliates that go with it, the processing plants, legislation that helps food travel from here to there, we could feed about 20% of the U.S. population one pork chop in the given calendar year, just to help put things in perspective. How small and local seems really big and how it can scale up from there. Just some random numbers. All right. Questions from the audience, or I'm going to have to ask some of these ones that came in through Brad and his team. Again, I told the panel I'm going to start with the easiest ones. Last chance, or I'm just going to start reading a few questions. All right, here we go. Get ready, panelists. We're going to start with challenges in workplace. What are the current trends of hiring? Is it hard to find people that want to work in the ag field? Of kids coming to high school or college, are there certain expectations, skills, experience you're looking for?
All of the above.
All of the above.
So, I guess I'll take that first. You know, in our business, we're definitely looking for people that are passionate about agriculture, that have a passion for animals and for working with livestock specifically. And that's not characteristics that everybody has. So that's one major character we're looking for. It is harder to find people for sure, especially people that want to work on a farm and want to work with livestock every single day. We've had to get a little more creative in our hiring techniques, and maybe I've shared it up here before, but we do have 7 or 8 folks that are from Mexico that are here on TN visas, and they have a professional education from Mexico from what an equivalent of a 4-year degree would be here in animal science from a Mexican university, and they're here working on a visa, and they can work for up to 3 years at a time on a single visa. So that's been extremely helpful in diversifying our workforce out from what we've historically hired just within the local area.
Brian, Carolyn?
Yeah, I can go next. You know, I love the skill set and the experience that we typically talk about. And so this comment isn't to minimize any of that, but I think what I look for, what we look for at Ralco is people that are hungry. And I didn't mean to play on those words, but it's one of the things that I think we've seen drift as a culture over time is just the hunger to belong, the hunger to progress, and to be stimulated by others to achieve and do greater things. I think in our society today, that's becoming more and more of a challenge, maybe because we don't give enough recognition to employees, but the ones that are excelling in our business are the ones that are really aggressive and getting after things. So certainly education, certainly experience is high on the priority list, but hungry workers are something that we're desperately looking for.
Carolyn, anything to add?
Yeah, speaking from wearing my Farm Bureau hat, the visa programs is an issue that we continue to work on nationally, but also locally. I think to attract workers, you need a strong rural community and infrastructure there with childcare, with workforce housing that is affordable. A lot of communities had grants for low-income housing, but then as soon as they get a job, they can't afford the next step up. They are no longer eligible for the low-income housing, so where do they go from there? So if we want to attract workers that might have that passion, that education, affordable housing, and affordable childcare are two things that our members keep talking about as bigger concerns for them.
I don't think this is unique to the ag industry. Try finding daycare, for your young kids. Go to your favorite restaurant and they're short 5 workers, so service is a little bit slower. Or maybe they're short a cook in the back that we never see and things like that. So this whole labor and willingness to work and the desire to work has definitely changed in the last couple of years, but 5 years, 10 years, 20 years as well too. So let's pull this around a little bit almost to the finish line. I see in agriculture and Brian and anybody in the dairy industry is certainly robotics is replacing humans for repetitive, health and well-being where you do the same thing for a 12-hour shift. If a robotic system can do that's maybe better short-term and maybe not long-term necessarily. But another question that came in that ties around, I think, to some of this, available workers, quality workmanship, what can be done to address the complexity around success in family farming? I think we've got 3 different examples of Mike's operation and Brian's, and different sizes, place. Senator Dames, you talk to a lot of people as well too. Let's try to address that. What can we do with these complexities? Because we're talking about multi-million-dollar operations in production agriculture, whether that's the farmer locally or scaling up to the larger scale and the production as well too. Go ahead, Senator Dames.
Well, I think one thing that can help a lot when it comes to succession in farmers and businesses is we have to increase the pass-through on the estate plan. We have to increase the pass-through. Right now it's about $3 million that you can pass through before you start paying estate taxes in Minnesota. We've been trying to increase that. It's a little tough to get it done, but I think if the stars line up, we can get that done, probably get it up to $5 million. Currently, the federal is about 11.5. Another thing that we're working on that we had in the tax bill last year was portability. So currently, a husband and wife would have $3 million apiece, and so the first spouse that passes away in Minnesota, if you want to use that full $3 million, you have to do it at the death of that person. So we're trying to do it so it's portable, so if the first spouse that passes away only uses, say, $1 million, that other $2 million then would be portable for the second spouse when they passed away. So if you stayed at $3 million, that second spouse then would have $5 million. Now that's not going to answer all the problems, but it's certainly going to help because a lot of these businesses and farms, the complexity of them, it's really hard to maybe take $3 million and set it aside in order to meet the criteria so you don't have to pay estate taxes on it. Where with portability, you could do a lesser amount, keep things in place, and yet know that at the end there was going to be $5 million that you could pass through. So that's a couple of things that I think the state could work on.
Mike, you've done this successfully.
So I think again, a few things that maybe have been hit on before from the same stage, but communication is key when it comes to succession planning, and in our case of our operation, it took 2 generations to make it work. My dad had to be open to us kids taking over the business, and it's not only me, it's my older sister Lori and my younger brother Matt, had to be open to us taking over the operation, and then we had to be willing to step up to the plate, and to Brian's comment earlier, we had to be hungry, right? I see some other younger producers or younger people that are interested in farming, and to be quite honest, some of them are really hungry and some of them just aren't that hungry, and as you indicated, it's a complex business. You've got to be nimble, you got to be on your feet, and if you're just going to sit back and relax, it's probably not going to get you to the next step, and not going to allow you to take over the operation and keep it a generational business. It's going to continue on into the future. So, but really, I think the biggest key is that you need to have communication, and it needs to take place early. We started our whole process. Graduated from college in 2007, came back to the operation full time in 2009, and by 2010 we had engaged a firm to help us with the process, and 2 or 3 years later we had some groundwork laid out, and I think finally last year, you could kind of say it's 2 years ago now, as you could say, when the final pieces were put together. So it was a 10-year process for us to accomplish. So time, patience, also huge parts of it.
Also, something that we talk about a lot in Farm Bureau. So we applied for a grant with the Department of Agriculture and hired Paul Lanou, who most of us know, and I'm not sure if he's here today or not. Paul Lanou is working as a facilitator, kind of a liaison to start families talking about succession. I know for many families, it's a difficult topic. Nobody wants to broach that, and it's uncomfortable. So bringing in a neutral third party sometimes is the answer. So for our membership, his services are free. They're paid for through this grant program. And it's kind of a pilot project through the Department of Agriculture that we're working on. So he's already had a lot of good conversations with families and trying to help them just think through what needs to happen, where does this process start, and who might be your facilitator to get everything in place for you. So it's, as you know, the workforce on the farmers are aging, gray hair, we're aging, but yet, we all think we're gonna live forever and can farm forever, but we can't. So sometimes we need to push that conversation even though we don't want to.
Well said, Carolyn. I mean, the communication is so critical. Family life, professional life, business life. The topics you try to avoid, but they're the most important topics to communicate with. Otherwise, whether it's agriculture from a producer level, it eventually is going to cease to exist, or it's going to get gobbled up by the bigger fish in the business world. Questions, audience, comments? I'll keep going down my roster. It's a 10-person team because we American Twins, right? Pitchers don't have, they don't want them. They changed that rule for the league too. Wusses. I mean, pitchers are ball players. Quarterbacks are football players. Take a hit. Come on, Tom Brady, right? We've got a helmet. Right. This kind of dives into this. Gets a little more complicated. We're working down towards the harder, maybe very specific, more pointed questions. But I'm going to put questions together. What does a recession look like in each of your panelists' opinions for your area of agriculture? And along with that, what is the biggest challenge in your business area within agriculture at the moment? Brian, let's toss it to you first.
Yeah, they are getting harder.
Well, just wait.
Yeah, well, I mean, the one great thing about our industry is people have to eat. And, I know we say those kinds of words a lot, but it is true. We're relatively insulated from that standpoint. People aren't going to walk away from food. So we need to become better and more efficient and do the right things according to the desires of the market. But we're going to have a business, so recession-proof, no, but we've got an advantage in that regard. I mean, I think at this particular point in time, to the second question, I was trying to think fast on that because there's so many challenges in this type of environment, but it does go back to the previous question about family farms and operations too. As this thing kind of swells, one of the real challenges is just the impact on cash flow, for example. I think our inventories over the last 12 months have risen 40, 50, maybe 60% at times. Why? The bank might ask, well, why do you need that much inventory? And it's pretty simple. We're going to need it. And if we don't order it now, and I know you run into this too, Mike, if we don't order it now and even pay for it now in some circumstances, we're not going to have it, 4 and 6 months down the road when our customers need it. So it creates a swell in the entirety of the business and the cash flow side that if you're not financially healthy, that's a tough one to adjust to. So that I think just industry-wide, that pressure on cash is a tough one.
Recessions are obviously never good for business anyway, in any way. Kind of what Brian alluded to there. I've seen some statistics before or some research data that's shown that, I'm not going to say pork's recession-proof, but compared to beef or some of the other proteins or higher value proteins, pork does fare better than them in times of recession. So by no means is that good for our business. It's just maybe not as bad as the next. Speaking a little bit off of Brian's point in inventories and availability of feed ingredients, it's been a crazy last 18 months. I mean, there's been times when it seemed like there was about lysine as a key ingredient into hog diets. It seemed like there was about 2 pounds of lysine available in the entire U.S. market. I mean, you couldn't find it anywhere. A lot of that has changed and subsided now, with a lot of changes taking place in supply chains and where we're getting our products from. But it's definitely been tougher that way. And with higher input costs, our cost of production has also ballooned. Fortunately, the revenue side of it has also gone up with it, but it takes a lot more capital just to be in the business today than it did 2 years ago. And that obviously, again, makes for some more conversations with your bank, kind of what you said. So recessions are, back to what I said, not good for anybody, but hopefully we can navigate through it all right here.
And the uncertainty that the financial sector, whether high inflation, recession, the financial uncertainty puts a larger burden on farmers and the ag businesses, elevators, everybody down the line. That feeds into mental health issues as well. But Jonathan and I raise all of our crops organic, so we have a specialty market in that regard as well. And our premiums shrink during a recession as well. People aren't affording things. People aren't able to buy things. Just all of the financial uncertainties we have, it creates a lot of fluctuations in our markets. It makes selling our crop harder. And then you add in weather woes and all of that too. There's just a lot of uncertainty and nervousness when we start talking about recessions.
Senator, please.
I think one of the things that is going to be very interesting in this, and I do think there's a recession coming, and that is, as Mike kind of alluded to, pork is pretty competitive, whatever the market might be. But I think that's where there's going to be some facets of agriculture are probably going to get hit pretty hard, because when there's a recession, things start getting tough. People are going to find ways of shifting that dollar to get the most they can for it in food on the table. And so when you get to some of those higher value things, they're going to shift to something else. So there are going to be certain parts of the ag economy that's going to take a pretty tough hit. Chances are, just like they will in the past recessions, they will survive, but it will be easier for some than it will other, and of course that's where the concern comes about.
I think we can't forget if you're cash rich and financially stable. Easier said than done, right? Financially stable, cash poor. That can put a business out of business. It has to cash flow. So there's opportunities among all the challenges and how we look to carve those opportunities out. I think I'll maybe throw this one to Senator Dames to start with, and then probably it piles on to Mike a little bit, and possibly with True Shrimp, maybe Brian can add some things in, or Carolyn that's involved in livestock feeding as well too. But the U.S. Supreme Court recently announced it will hear the case challenged California's Proposition 12. Now, for all of us that don't know what Proposition 12 is, this is an animal husbandry housing type law, which, oversimplify it, Mike, and I apologize, but basically pork cannot be sold that was raised in pens. Is that the short and sweet? Stalls. Pens, sorry. So it's a confinement-related issue. So we want free-range, pork in a sense. Okay, so what does this mean for us here in Minnesota, dear Senator Dames, and pork production? And why is the victory in this case important to the pork industry? And I just want to bolt on a little bit. California seems to want to impose their will on the other 49 states of the United States of America. And I think last year we talked about electric vehicles and California laws that are adapted in Minnesota as well too. So maybe these kind of dovetail together, Senator Dames. What can you provide us for insight?
Well, I don't think too many people want to have to live like California does. I think Minnesotans would rather be like Minnesotans versus Californians. But as far as the livestock in stalls and this and that, it can be taken to court at this point in time. I don't know how far it would get. I think it's really unfortunate that there's that group, that faction out there that's really pushing for that, because I don't think they realize what that's going to do to the cost and availability for food. And it's going to drive the cost of food up probably considerably, because there's going to be a lack of production of food that's free-ranged, and that's really what they want. But I think it's a while before that's going to happen in Minnesota. I'm not convinced it will happen. I think if we watch what happens in California and take some of these things that they want to do and watch what happens when they start doing them, usually in many cases it's a failure and doesn't work real well. And so I think a lot of other states will watch that and probably not get too excited about doing some of those things. Now we got to keep in mind there are folks that want to do that, and they do push a pretty big stick, understand that. But I still think that common sense will prevail.
So Ken, play off your quiz from before. How many people live in California?
Oh boy, who's got a Google machine? More than in Minnesota, and I would say that's 5x Minnesota.
That's at least 10x.
10x.
Right? I think 50, 60 million people live in the state of California. Proposition 12 is pushing forward requirements that pork producers would have to live by in order to sell their product in the state. That, as you indicated, the Supreme Court is hearing the case. So they're going to rule later this year. Well, they're going to hear it later this year, hopefully rule early next year, whether or not to allow the law to move forward or strike it down and send it back. So back to the numbers game. To get back to where I started is, with 60 million people living there, California consumes about 12% of the U.S. pork. When Prop 12 was announced and put forward, about 1% of the pork in the U.S. would have fit the requirements that California was pushing forward. Since then, a bunch of producers have made modifications and prepared themselves for the law to be able to sell into California, but still is only going to meet about 7 or 8% of their needs based on the latest estimates that I've heard. And I mean, these are really just spitball estimates. So that leaves about 6% of the state, 5 to 6% of the state short of pork. Well, to your comment on pricing, it doesn't take much of a economics degree to figure out what's going to happen when there's not availability to that degree. So very dangerous. But the thing that's more concerning to me as a citizen is that California is trying to push standards from their state onto other states and impede upon interstate commerce. And that's really the root of this issue. And given that there's 60 million people, give or take, in California, that can start to create some pretty big waves, because if you're a company and you want to just produce a product, you're going to do it for your biggest market, and that runs the risk of spreading across the rest of the U.S. So I think there's a lot more at stake in this Prop 12 case than just its impact on pork. It could be on anything from feed to organic production. They may set up their own little set of organic standards. Who knows, right? It's anything. So or food to that point. So I think there's a lot of eyes watching this case to see what the future could hold.
The good thing about Minnesota, when you look at how Minnesota ranks for food production, we can be a self-sustaining state. California cannot. They have a lot of people, they have a big land mass, but a lot of it can't produce what you need to consume as a human. So they have to import a lot of their, I'll call them the food byproducts, because they can't raise them there. They got a great wine industry, I've been told. I prefer beer and whiskey, but for those who like wine, you've probably been in Napa Valley and things like that. Big amusement park that's maybe better than the Mall of America. But they have to rely on other states, countries around them to feed the 60 million people in that state. Minnesota, we can feed the 3 to 4 to 5 million people, no problem, in the boundaries of our state, very easily, with a great selection.
On the lawsuit, it's the National Pork Producers and the American Farm Bureau that brought the lawsuit forward. And there have been a couple of friendly briefs filed in support of the pork producers and American Farm Bureau from government, supporting our angle for the reason that Mike mentioned, the interstate commerce clause and the dangerous precedent that would set. So it's something that it will affect Minnesota's pork industry. It will affect a lot of things that we do. Some of our organic grain goes to feed organic animals in California. So if they are starting to dictate how we do things or set their own standards and that are grossly above and beyond the usual standards, then that will throw their food system into a big disarray.
I would build a little bit on Mike's comment around this not being just a pork issue. Yeah, it's in this particular case it is, but this goes way beyond pork. And I think there's probably two kinds of mindsets behind Proposition 12. One would be what I would call an evil intent. They frankly want us out of business, and they'll do what they can to put us out of business. And then there's an ignorant intent. People just don't know. And I think that's one of the opportunities for us, whether we're talking pork or beef or chickens or shrimp, what are we doing for the American consumer that makes their life better, makes it easier. And so I think our ability to communicate and connect with the consumer industry-wide through Farm Bureau and all the other programs that we utilize to connect with the consumer is a pretty critical thing for us in the future.
And I think that feeds right back to Senator Dame's comment too. Minnesotans want to be Minnesotans. If Minnesotans want to be Californians, we'd move to California and be Californians. And that common sense, we all want good, nutritious food. We all want safe food. We all want it timely when it's time to get home and make it. It needs to be on the shelf or needs to be in my refrigerator, and it has to be priced fairly, not cheap, fairly. That's the value proposition in business. Cheap is cheap. You're going to get to buy cheap again, because cheap's going to break or not be the quality standard that you like or that you want. And we see this, in our side of the business, a consulting company. EPA's been sued on various pesticides. Some of these are US-based companies, some are global companies, and we're the 9th District Court in California to challenge the EPA's ruling that has an act that governs pesticide safety. Of the day we apply it, how long can we walk back in the field to the food that eventually goes on our plates or in through the livestock system. So there's a lot of groups trying to circumvent our basic 3 branches of government, it seems like, and they're having a lot of success with it in the last 10, 20 years, and it seems like they're getting better at it as well, too. Okay, to build off of this, I think this is an interesting question. It's a great question. I think it fits into some of these black swan things we can't always control, but sometimes they keep us up at night. In production agriculture, we're so vulnerable because the weather has to treat it. Production goes down, we're at the risk of not making profitable. But this is one of those big events we probably hear about on the radio a lot. USDA recently rolled out the Protect Our Pigs. This sounds really important, protect our pigs. Prevent African swine fever. SF, we hear about that over in Europe and Asia, islands fairly close to the United States. Why is it important to keep African swine fever out of the U.S.? If found in the U.S., what would be the impact on the pork industry and the broader ag sector, aka the price we beef, poultry, bananas, eggs, whatever it may be. What is your farm doing specifically to prevent and prepare? Now, I give you time to think about that. This feels like it's a Mike question and maybe a Carolyn question, but I think there's a legislative spin here too, because behind the scenes, we don't realize how much USDA, Minnesota Department of Ag, works to protect against these bad things. Up with the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association for their meeting. Half of the crowd audience at the closing ceremony cried because of the stress they went through with bird flu and all the long hours people put in to minimize the financial impact that there were predictions would hit the U.S. in 2015. And there were tears of joy and being proud, but out of tiredness and frustration as well too. But that's a pretty small industry compared to the producers, the poultry industry, Minnesota or here in the U.S. African swine fever. Senator Dames, you look like you're chomping at the bit to give us good information here. Tell us something.
Well, the Department of Ag is very, very well aware of this. They're really monitoring very close, and we've been putting in additional money in the emerging issues account for the Department of Ag. Also been putting in additional dollars into the veterinary labs at the University of Minnesota. I think when the avian flu went through the first time, I think that Department of Ag and the department at the University of Minnesota, the Vet Science Department, I think, and a lot of the legislatures, I think we learned a lot out of that process because it hit hard, and it was very, very devastating. That really put us on that we needed to be alert for these diseases when they hit and do what's possible to do, and that takes some funding, and you have to be pretty nimble to react to that. And I think the second round of avian flu was reacted to much better, but if you can imagine what happened in the first round of avian flu and now apply that to the swine flu, because a lot of depopulation is going to be part of that process. And so if you take a look at that and imagine with the amount of hogs we have raised in Minnesota, and if it's spread anywhere as fast as what the avian flu did the first trip around, you could just about imagine what that's going to do to our livestock industry, and especially in the hog area. It's just going to be totally devastating. So as a government, state government, Department of Ag, we have to do everything we can to be prepared as we can be prepared. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we get closer, consistently are getting closer. And I think that the avian flu brought this back out again, and I think that has really put a lot of focus on the swine flu. If that hits, and I think we're getting more readily set to deal with it, but it's still not there, but it's something we have to continue to work on.
So as we tie this together too, before Mike adds some comments, or Carolyn or Brian, what did we know about the avian flu, bird flu? Whether it was in Minnesota or US-wide or globally. A lot of it was what we refer to as backyard flocks. I've got a few chickens, I got a few ducks, I got a few geese, and they're very hard to monitor versus pork facilities or poultry facilities. We have a pork facility, a barn that might have 1,000 head of finishing animals in it. And there might be 4 or 5 barns at that same site. So the monitoring becomes easier, but still a huge challenge itself. So if we go back to not raising sows that produce little pigs in stalls, Prop 12, everybody here goes to Mike, I just want to buy 1 sow, 1 boar, I'm going to raise all my own pigs. I'm going to take care of my own pork production. I'll slaughter it myself, or I've got friends, we can drink beer, slaughter some hogs, make some sausage, make some pork chops, make some. But to monitor an outbreak is impossible, because by the time you know what happens, it is so far beyond comprehension to try to contain it. Now you're talking about controlling it, right to the depopulation of poultry herds, potential pork operations, things like that. So just to put some things in perspective of how agriculture has happened from subsistence living to larger scale production, where we're now knocking closer to 8 billion people on the planet, it's hard for us to be all backyard gardeners, backyard farmers, unfortunately. Mike, other comments around?
Yeah, and what you hit on there, African swine fever really started hitting the news in 2018 when China had their first confirmed cases. And as you discussed, industry in China is much different than it is in the U.S. A lot of still backyard production, waste feeding, and things like that. So the virus moved across the countryside of China very, very rapidly. Fortunately, we've been able, as a U.S. industry, been able to observe what's happened there, and it's helped us prepare and solidify our plan to understand how the virus moves in feed, how it moves through fecal and oral transmission, and fortunately for one comparison between HPAI or African swine fever doesn't move through the air quite as easily as HPAI does, so it's a much easier virus to manage in terms of that. But its impact on the U.S. industry would be huge if there were cases found in the U.S. Exports would basically shut down overnight, and it would create basically a halt until we can figure out where it all is, where it's been, where it's going, until countries would elect basically to accept our plan for regionalization, or would they just completely shut off our exports altogether. U.S. we export about 25% of the pork that we produce. So back to some quick economics, you take that 25% market away, prices are gonna tank overnight, and impact on broader ag. Pigs eat corn, pigs eat soybeans. It's all part of the life cycle picture here. Its impact is going to spread beyond just the pork sector into a general, more broad ag sector. We're definitely doing everything we can to prepare for it. Putting plans in place, enhanced biosecurity plans, working with the USDA and Board of Animal Health on some improved testing measures, how we could be more responsive if it comes. And to your point, Gary, all those organizations have gotten 2 really good training, the HPAI in 2015 and again this year. And that's unfortunate for the turkey growers, as you indicated. So,
But that's the difference between learning, educating yourselves, versus being given the answer. What the hell are we going to do if it hits the pork industry? Well, I don't know. Well, can we learn the industry? You bet we can. Is it 100% applicable? No. How do we modify to make it applicable? Do I want the answer, or do I want an education? Ken always wants an education. Occasionally I'll want the answer too, because I don't want to fail the quiz, right? But I want the education. That's more important in my life path than just knowing the answer to 2 + 2 is 4, correct? Other things to add? Until about 1 o'clock, I want to make time. I feel like I'm a moderator, not a facilitator, because we've got no questions from the important items. Oh, perfect, thank you. Now I can feel more successful by the time I'm done. Question, sir?
I was asking about your thoughts on energy policy, both in Minnesota and nationwide. It seems like we're kind of forgetting that we need base load for power production. I know locally here they're talking pretty big wind outfits, possibly a big solar farm, all to benefit the Twin Cities, not doing a whole lot for us. I guess it does help, specific farmers when it gets on their land. One of the concerns I have, I know they're talking about a big solar farm, and since we don't have much for base load backing it up, one of the things they're talking about is big battery farms. I have a little bit of concern on that environmentally when we're sitting in a rough weather area here with tornadoes and stuff like that. I was just wondering if there's been anything, any studies on, you look at like a tornado that went through Andover, Kansas earlier this year. If that goes through one of those, I guess I just have some environmental concerns and that we don't have enough base load. We went back to the Proposition 12 thing of California. We're also doing that with the car industry, correct? Going to go with what they demand. So I guess I just want your input on what you think of how we're handling all this.
Talk about the automobile industry, and the governor did pass an executive order, and then he had the PCA do the rulemaking to back it up. And so we now are under under California's rules when it comes to electric cars. I think the governor's pushing this way too fast. We don't have the ability to get to the point he wants to get to in 7 years. We don't have that ability for several reasons. One is we don't have the charging stations. Two is we don't have the infrastructure to handle and sell these cars as it's going to need to be. And also, we don't have all of the technology that's going to make these cars work as well as they're going to need to work in cold weather. Unfortunately, if California changes something, we follow with that change. So that is an issue. When it gets to baseload energy, the best baseload energy we're going to have is fossil fuel. And as we know, that's why there's this big push on all of the green energy is to get rid of fossil fuels. We are not at a stage to where we can get rid of fossil fuels and still have a base load of energy. That's why you see in California a lot that they have these blackouts. Well, that's moving to Minnesota. One of the cities up north had a warning here a couple of weeks ago that very likely there would be a blackout because of the use of energy during the, when it was real hot one day, there'd be too much energy consumed and there wouldn't be enough production because we've gotten rid of a lot of our fossil fuels. So when we talk about solar farms are not a real cheap way of generating electricity. But once that electricity is generated, it's got to be put on a line and it's got to be used. We have no real storage capacity at this point. So that's why there's a lot of research, a lot of engineering being done on what type of a battery system can be set up in different areas so that that energy can go to that group of batteries and be held for the peak season. And so when we need the most basic energy, that could be held in these batteries. But from the research I've seen, and I know in LCCMR, that's the Legislative Commission on Minnesota Resources, we've put several dollars into some of this research. And so far, there's really nothing coming out of that research that's real promising. There's some ideas, but something that's going to maintain our base load, we're not there. We're not even near there. So there's where my concerns are. And so we keep working, trying to slow this thing down so that technology can catch up with the will and the want of some of the folks that want to get this converted rather rapidly. But we have to have a balance there. We have to make sure that we have the capacity to manage this and to make it work before we just jump in and say this is what you have to do. And right now, just on cars alone, there's a real sharp deadline when so many cars have to be electric. And so the penalty is going to be with dealerships. If you get an allocation of electric cars, and if you don't sell that allocation, then you can't sell some of the gas vehicles. And so it's really going to be hard to move this stuff around and make this work under the current conditions. But we'll see what happens in the next couple of years. I think there's some things on the horizon that can help slow down the California movement. And I think there's some things being engineered that might help some of the storage of some of this electricity, but still not going to be the total answer. Well, it's interestingly enough, but I've been there now 12 sessions, 12 years, and this is the first year we got a bill passed that would accept nuclear in our energy grid. But it didn't, that was one of the bills that got caught up at the end of the session, and so that bill never got moved. It got out of conference committee, but never got off the House and Senate floor. But I do believe next year that will be part of the environmental bill again, and that's going to make a major difference. Nuclear has really changed in the last 30 years. It's changed drastically in the last 10 years. And now they have those portable nuclear generators that they move around, and there's some real positive things out there. The biggest issue is we've got to get the public to understand that this nuclear system is totally different than what we had 50 years ago. And that's what people revert. When you say nuclear, that's the first thing they think about. And this is a much different system, and so we need to get people to realize that in order to accept it. It's a very strong possibility, yes. Yep.
Brad, question back there?
Hi, Garrett Leifering, Green Team out of Mankato. This is a question for Senator Doms. If food and ag does well, it often leads to success in rural communities, as does manufacturing, professional services, community banks, and ultimately the citizens of those. How are you and your colleagues on the Rural Development Committee at the state helping support the gap in funding for rural communities, and then the competitiveness of other states seeking our businesses and ultimately talent?
Can I have you repeat that with the wind and stuff? I couldn't pick up everything you were saying.
So food and ag often leads to the success. If food and ag does well, so do communities and the citizens and other value chain-related food and ag businesses. Being a part of the Rural Development Committee, how are you addressing with your colleagues the gap in funding when looking at affordable housing, childcare, and beyond, and then also the competitiveness of other states seeking our businesses and the talent?
Well, if we start with the first piece, housing, right now we're looking at some things and we're trying to get the housing associate or the Minnesota Housing Group, the agency, to start looking at some different options. So for instance, we have an opportunity to bring a lot of these modular homes in that are well built and they meet a lot of standards, and yet the cost is less than what a stick house would be built. And so right now we have a problem with the department, with the Minnesota Housing, in order to allow some of those houses to be used. So that's something that has to be worked on. There's a lot of subsidies in Minnesota housing right now. We put about $100 million every biennium into subsidies for low-income housing. So that's kind of things that are happening there. As far as competing with other states business-wise, one way you do that is you do it with taxes. And Minnesota is about the fourth-ranked highest state in taxes across the board in the nation. And we're very uncompetitive when it comes to taxes for businesses. And so if we can drive those taxes down, that helps a lot. Another thing we just talked about a little bit ago is energy. If you take a look at what's happened to energy in the last 5 years, it has went up considerably. So we have to make sure that we start doing some things or work on things that keep that energy cost from going up much higher than what it is, and if anything, try to bring it back down. Because it's companies that are looking at coming into Minnesota, one of the first things they're looking at now is energy and finding out that we're not real competitive from that standpoint. Is that kind of the bulk of what your question was? Okay, I think I missed something. But that's what we're doing. Now, from a standpoint of economic development, there's a lot of grants out there, and those grants work different ways. Those are grants that local economic development organizations can apply for. There are grants that larger organizations can apply for. As far as a head-on competition, subsidy-wise against South Dakota, which is one of our main competitors, we don't have something that's a subsidy. So if Company A says they're going to go to South Dakota, and it's just much better for them. We really don't have much. We've got some economic development grants, but they're not going to be competitive in order to keep those people. I mean, it's not something that's going to make the decision of keeping people from leaving or coming. They're not going to do that at this point.
Big topic, a lot of challenges. We're final 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, something like that, I think. Questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Hold it a sec. I think we're going to get a mic to you. Brad's got to do something important. He's the runner, so we can hear the panelists can hear the question.
Okay, so Raphael from Southwest Minnesota State. So does the future of ag include post-secondary education? So if so, why are we experiencing decrease in enrollment in all ag programs? Not just at Southwest Minnesota State, but the two-year colleges as well.
Boy, big question there. Why are we seeing enrollment in ag programs? I'll throw one caveat at. 30 years ago, I was at the Minnesota St. Paul campus. Nice little friendly campus, detached from the Minneapolis campus, where all the big fun really happens. Football, basketball, the partying. We just studied and worked hard and went home on the weekends. All us farm kids. But in the 4.5 years I was at the University of Minnesota, as an example, We had one professor and advisor that at every last meeting before we went home for summer vacation made us stand up. Kids from the farm versus kids from the city. And in 4.5 years, it swayed from the majority of the people stood up as kids from the farm going to college at the University of Minnesota to 4.5 years later, the majority was kids from a city, been moving quickly in 30 years since I had college education. Thoughts, ideas. What I'll add kind of fits to a tail end question too that will cover. We don't tell our story very well in agriculture. We defend what we're doing as best we can, but we don't front lead it with telling our story why we're doing things the right way. Why that we're environmentally responsible, why we're producing the highest quality product for the least cost possible so the consumer has the most affordable product produces. So I think that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is I don't think a lot of young people are taught what is agriculture involved. It's not me sitting on a tractor, it's not Mike checking pigs in the barn this afternoon, it's all the other things from production. You know, from a production facility that might be producing bread, might be producing shrimp that gets shipped overseas. So I'll turn it over to the panelists now. Give you some time to think.
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot in part to agriculture's lack of excitement in the last several decades. I mean, we have seen so much more of the energy on campuses, in social media circumstances where, you know, the excitement is kind of everywhere else. Energy, medical, you know, the fields that get the most attention at campuses are fields that are not agriculturally related these days. I think that's one of the problems. I personally tend to look in the mirror on that one, though. I mean, even to the point about, you know, not. You know, I've done a lot of thinking about this because you mentioned I had 7 young kids, and you know, today's kid, and I think today's society is much less interested in everyone else. They're a little more interested in themselves, and we can kick and scream against that and tell all of us why it's wrong, but it's true. And I think our ability to connect consumers with food is one of our great opportunities, and it is one of the things that I think can make agriculture exciting again. How do we do that? Boy, it's a big idea, and it's a big challenge ahead of us as an industry. But you know, put it. This is probably a crude way to put it, but it's lost its sex appeal. I mean, agriculture has to be more exciting than it is today. So I think it's a huge issue for us, Raphael. You know, I think programs like at Southwest Minnesota State University are so critical, and also the ancillary programs around it, like Marl. You know, getting people that are in the city out to the farm to really see how it works is so critical. I think about the 60 million people in California. How many of those people have been out to really experience an operation like Mike's? They hear 400,000 pigs, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, we could throw a 60 million people party? That's got to be a corporate farm. Or he's got to be a rich guy. He's in the top, you know, whatever of income you know, making businesses. We should tax him more. I mean, there are all of these things that kind of feed into our agricultural problems, but if those 60 million people could come out and talk to Mike, they'd realize that Mike and his family are the real heroes here, and they're solving some real life problems for me as a consumer, somebody who likes to eat pork chops. Connection to consumers is a big part of this.
Senator.
Oh, sorry. I think we're still paying the price for what happened with ag education. If you remember, when the funding got tough in public schools, what did they do? They cut their ag class. That was one of the first classes that got cut, and that happened for many, many years. And just within the last 10 years, that has started to really get turned around. So now a lot of those schools that got rid of their ag program have put one in, or are in the process of adding another 1 or 2 instructors. But we still haven't got that gap closed that was opened up when a lot of those schools left those programs go. And over at the college, you have the program there for ag educators. And to this day, we still have a shortage of ag educators because these classes are expanding so fast throughout all these schools that we don't have enough ag educators graduating every year to fill the openings in those classes. And so the more students we get in these ag classes, the broader this base gets, the more of those students are going to go to college and be ag-minded. So I think part of this is certainly not all of it, but a small piece of it is the fact that we took that away. And when we did that at the high school level, it followed at the two-year colleges. A lot of them dropped their ag programs. So agriculture is something that it's a business, it's an industry that you have to tell the story every time you talk to somebody. And it's what we have to do to educate the consumer. And so when you take a big piece of that out of there, we've missed that for years, and we have to get that back in there, and that's going to help with some of this education, educating the consumer. I was at a dairy farm, and this is probably 3 years ago, and this young boy is watching these cattle come in. They'd step in place, they'd get back out, and his dad was there, and there was a school bus outside from the Twin Cities. And it was young kids and the chaperones there, and this little boy looks at his dad, and he said, "Dad, I just can't believe this." He said, "These cows are trained so well that they know their spot in this carousel, they know where to go eat, they know when to do it." The dad looked at him and he said, "Son, if it wasn't because I rode the school bus with you, we'd be going home." He said, "I can't believe the cruelty they've done to these cattle, to teach these cattle to do that." He said, "That was all done by beating them into submission." And his son looked at him and he said, "Well, Dad, they don't, that." Nope, he said, "That's what happened." And he said, "I'll never buy milk from the grocery store again. I'll buy it from that place 2 blocks down the street that make it." I looked at him and I thought, nah, there's not enough time in the day to explain this to you. But those attitudes are out there. And that's one of the problems we have in agriculture is people believe those kinds of things. And that's one of the things that we have to work on. No matter what our walk in life is, we're part of agriculture. We have to get people to understand that these are friendly businesses and that they're doing the best they can environmentally. They're treating this livestock why it might beat his pigs. I mean, why would you do that when that's a commodity that you're raising food for and trying to make a profit to grow your business?
Well said. Carolyn?
Both Brian and the senator brought up things that I totally agree with. And I'll add that I think the attitude towards agriculture has changed so much in the last 20 years. I mean, I've been, next month, I'll have been a farmer for 34 years. And in that time, I've seen a lot of change in attitude towards the agriculture industry, towards farmers and the trust factor. Farmers used to rank super high on the trust factor, and agriculture was seen as a noble job. And I think our kids are seeing us fight so hard against environmental regulations, the PETAs of the world, all of the lawsuits that are happening now, like Prop 12, and they're seeing that it's a lot more stressful than what it was, 20, 25 years ago. And they don't necessarily know that they can handle that. We had 3 daughters. Our youngest would be more than capable of taking over the farm, but she has no interest because she didn't think she could handle the pressure. And I think that is what our kids are seeing. So we're not doing a great job of telling our kids the good parts either. They just see the raw, the real, the stressed out parents. They're not seeing the good parts. And I think that is affecting the kids that might want to come home and farm. Some of them might try something else first.
So very quick, casual observations normally lead to false conclusions. And that's a lot of what agriculture is. It's a drive-by observation for 98% of the population, because less than 2% of us are actively engaged in production agriculture. And that keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So we have to get it right, and we have to do it better, and most importantly, we all have to go home at the end of the luncheon and tell our stories for rural Minnesota, for agriculture in rural Minnesota, and how does that have a positive economic impact for the greater state of Minnesota. Mike, any other topics on this for enrollment? And it feeds right back into one of the first questions, employment pool. Right. If kids aren't going for agriculture, we've got a smaller pool to hire good people to work at.
Yeah, a lot of the things mentioned already are huge, and to your point, Senator Dames, is the initial cutback in ag classes at public schools is a huge part of it, and I think as an industry we just need to do a better job of promoting what it is to work in agriculture and what it actually looks like to bring those people back. And now that some of those programs have gone back, with just doing it as an activity or club, making it more of a career out of the rest of their lives. So
there, I believe there still is a board game called Play Farm or something like that. I believe maybe it didn't sell good enough and it's off the Walmart shelves or something like that. But I used to play board games as a kid. My kids and my grandkids, what do? They play games on their phone and download the app. Grandpa, I'd still rather hit the remote control in my recliner, grab a cold cocktail, and watch some show I've seen 52 times already. It's mental therapy for me. But maybe for the younger generation, the ag generation, we need a cool kick-ass farm app. Because then more kids would jump on there and they'd tell all their friends about it on social media, and farming would be back to sexy, Brian. And not the forgotten thing that we did in the 80s and 90s is we let our most important industry maybe get taken for granted a little bit. And now it's underfunded, and now we're trying to springboard it back. I think this is an excellent spot for time we have to close. There's two things, Brad, I think that maybe for next year. One, that we have a farm that is expiring in 2023. That might be a huge topic. I apologize we didn't quite get to that question and some of the potential impacts for agriculture and nutritional programs. And then I don't know where the question came from. Mike, you might have somebody who comes up after. In the Sioux Falls area, there's Holstone packing plant being projected to open and things like that. Would employ a lot of people, a lot of good things, but with a lot of good things come a lot of negative things. Somebody might have a question on that. I just want to cue that one up for you too, Mike. We just don't have time to dive into that one. So I want to thank the panelists. Here's how I'm going to close it out. Carolyn and I and Brian were sitting at lunch together with husband Jonathan talking about good things to eat and drink. So Carolyn's an organic producer. About 10 years ago when I was in the seed industry, if we had to rely on 100% organic production for food nutrition, 1 out of 4 people would starve to death in the world. So pick your friends you want to, keep eating with and cast the 4th one out on your way home if we're going to have a revolution, 100% organic agriculture. But one of the cool things John and Carolyn's farm do is they grow organic grain that goes into whiskey production. Vodka, sorry. I like whiskey more than vodka. So we've got a potential for cocktail hour next year, and you take Brian's cover with true shrimp, and you turf is beef and shrimp still at most restaurants, a little shrimp kebab, and you wrap it in bacon, and with a side of pork chops. And as we have the farm bill debate, Senator Dames can rally up all his other senators and legislators and maybe fund this thing for us. We could have a hell of a lot of fun next summer in July. And you can maybe get reelected too. But you'll just think of how connected we are. Small rural Minnesota, Lyon County, Marshall, Minnesota, the surrounding towns, and there's whiskey, there's shrimp, there's pork being shipped not only outside the boundaries of Minnesota, but maybe outside the United States as well too. So to not be excited about agriculture, Raphael, I don't know what kids are thinking about anymore. I just don't. We have to help them understand what does agriculture look like from that 10,000-foot view. If I look at satellite imagery once a week, I have to know something about electrical engineering. Planters are running electric drives, not hydraulic motors or PTO shafts anymore. You've got to get them to think outside the small box to get that panoramic view. Brian, thank you. Carolyn, thank you. Senator Dames, thank you for taking our voices forward and our ideas. Mike, thank you as always. With that, let's give our panel a round of applause.